Hello, and welcome back to Tales of Folklore and Coffee. Today, I'll be telling you a story of a lord, his daughter, and a priest in the Russian 1890s. It's a kind of ghost story, although more of a haunting tale if anything else. As a quick forewarning, this episode does have beheading in it, so if there are small children around, listen at your own risk and cover the children's ears. Without further delay, let's listen to the story. Episode 3: The White Lady. It was the year 1895, in Krakow, Russia. It was dark. As the night began to draw in close around the priest, the carriage jostled around while it hit rocks and mud of the mountain pass. He'd been called from his duties to tend to a young woman, for a reason he didn't know. Whoever sent him said it was urgent, and nothing more. The sound of hooves squelching the mud below turned to clacking as they entered the castle gate, the drawbridge clambering its way up to let in the visitor. As the priest stepped out, he noticed the air had grown to be like ice, and the snow silently fell. A servant came to see him in, holding a lantern close while the wind howled. "Do you know why I'm here?" the priest asked. With some curiosity, he rubbed his hands together, trying to get some feeling back into them. "Only that you are here, sir. I know nothing else aside from that." While he was led into the main hall of the castle, the servant didn't seem quite as so. He didn't have a demeanor of such. Although, who was the priest to judge? Perhaps he was a servant out of some sort of pact. No matter what he thought, though, he had to focus. There was someone here who needed him. "If you wait here a moment, the Lord will join you shortly." The servant bowed his head to the priest while he blew out the lantern. The priest sat a long while, his heart pounding the longer he stayed in the castle, the dim light and the howling wind doing nothing to soothe his nerves. What seemed like hours later, the lord of the castle arrived, his stern face making the priest even more nervous than before. He was a large man, as the priest would soon find out. He had his daughter in tow with him, a girl not much older than 16, all clothed in white from head to toe. One would think she was dressed for a wedding, if it weren't for the missing veil and bouquet. "Your Grace," the priest stood, bowing his head towards the Lord. "It is I who should be addressing you, for I summoned you into the mountains so late. It's almost the witching hour after all." The man seemed to tell a joke, although it came off as deadly serious by his countenance. A chill ran up the priest's spine. His hands shook as he hid them in his lap as he listened to the Lord. "I suppose it's best that I simply tell you why you're here." The Lord sat back, taking a cup of tea in hand. "My daughter needs to confess, though we are not able to travel to the nearest church." So it was a simple confession. The priest felt his nerves calmed as he listened to the Lord. After a time of conversing, the Lord left the room so that his daughter could have her confession time. The girl was tense. She wrung her hands as she looked at everything in the room besides the priest. Although, after seeing the man's gentle nature, she took a deep breath and began to confess. "I've fallen in love," she began, as she sighed as if the stress of her situation had begun to melt away. "Is that so?" The priest smiled, listening to the young girl. "Though it not be to my father's liking," she continued, trying to keep her voice low. "I've been seeing a man from the village, a man whom I've loved since I was a young girl." She stared at her hands in her lap, then looked to the man sitting across from her. "I wish to marry him, although I want to keep my father's wishes as well." The priest nodded as he listened to the youth. She was gentle, sweet, and caring. Although, when the axe came down, that all ended in a short moment. Red. Red was all the priest could see as the servant held the broad blade of an axe and the head of the girl on the table. Her hair stained in her own blood, and her white dress drenched scarlet. "Thank you. Your services have proved invaluable, brother." The Lord stepped out from the shadows, joining the servant. The priest had fallen backward from his seat at the table. His stomach churned as his heart left his chest in fear. "Come, have a seat. I understand this is quite alarming. You see, my daughter did fall in love with that boy from the village. Though, it's better this way," he said, taking a seat himself, while the servant placed a sheet over the dead girl's body. "You see, the boy in the village is the son of a witch, and of course, of lower class. I've warned my daughter about him many times. She even had the audacity to tell me she wasn't seeing him anymore, even when her bed was always cold most nights, and others saw them in the village below." The man explained while he poured the tea for the priest. "And with you here, I finally got the truth from her. And as I am aware, you priests are not allowed to recount anyone's sins or confessions." The Lord smirked, while downing the last of his tea. Years passed, and so did the Lord. The tale of the Lord's daughter going missing was chalked up to an urban legend. Some say she ran away with the boy she confessed to loving. Although, years later, when the castle had been bought out by the state, crews began to knock down walls, and that had been part of the original building. And it was quite a fright when they found a skeleton of a young woman with a skull not far from her body. This episode was very different from the last two that I wrote, as the story I found was pretty detailed. It's mostly been told in Russia and the city of Krakow for about 100 years now. Most thought it was, and still is, a folktale about keeping young girls from chasing romance. If that's the case, I definitely don't want to be caught in a romantic relationship anytime soon. For the story aspect, it was a lot of fun to play around with horror elements, as I mostly write fantasy and sometimes modern-day short stories. To go somewhere different with this story was really exciting, although I feel since the original tale was just as violent, I couldn't stray away from the truth as much as I would have liked to. While I couldn't fit the actual story in here without it feeling disjointed, the castle in Krakow that this story is from is said to be haunted by the young lady that once lived there. She's generally dressed in white, and wails when she sees someone who's helplessly in love and or to be married. The girl will turn into a kind of deadly wraith trying to kill anyone who has what she could not. The girl is still said to haunt the castle where she was killed and where her body was found. Thank you for listening. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube, please make sure to leave a comment below, and make sure to leave a like and share, as it really helps my podcast. If you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, or even Soundcloud, thank you for your support. And make sure to rate and review this program. The music in this podcast was The Ballad of Robin Hood by Logan Epic Canto and Aequilibrium by Andrey Vinogradov.